Kathy and Vigo, let's go. We're ready.
So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Steger, for your really wonderful presentation. We'll be in touch. And so I think many of you might know who I am because I've been a music therapist like for forever. So I'm Kathy Murphy, and I'm going to give a little bit about how I got into this, and then I'm going to introduce my colleague, Dr. Vigo Kruger. So there are three very influential music therapists in my journey to where I am now, because when I started music therapy back last century in the 1980s, music therapy had moved from its work in the VA, where it was more psychodynamic and relationally based, to behavioral music therapy. And so in my first job, when I was supposed to count how many seconds somebody could shake a maraca, which I honestly could care less about, I'm going to try to be tactful. Most of you know when God was handing out tact, I was drinking coffee, so I have none. But I really did not care how long somebody could share a maraca, and I really hated that work. And I'm like, why did I do this? So I went to OT school, hated that, was in pre-med. And while I was in pre-med, I worked with a man who had muscular dystrophy. And I realized I could do more for this person than anybody because I could be there with music. Then I read a book by Edith Boxhill, Music Therapy for the Developmentally Disabled. And she was the first American music therapist to say, we do not need, you're all here for the spice, thank you. We do not need to be working behaviorally. Individuals with developmental disabilities are humans, and they have the right to relational experiences. They have the right to a set experience. And her book drew from principles of Carl Rogers and Fritz Perls. And I was like, wow, okay, this is why I went to music therapy school. Then I met Dr. Bruscia, who changed my life immeasurably. And I would not be standing here today as a music therapist were it not for Dr. Bruscia. And then I learned more about, yes, it's about the relationship. It's about making music with people. And it's like looking for changes. Then as a doctoral student, I went to my first World Congress where I met Dr. Steger and learned about the early beginnings of community music therapy and went, oh my God. Okay, so we do a little bit of that in community music schools where we have adaptive lessons and we try to help people be able to access their musicality and participate in music. But there seems like there is more here. And then I got caught up in finishing my PhD and, teaching and all of that other stuff. And then I went to a World Congress in Japan where I met Dr. Kruger, and we have been collaborating on work ever since. He really piqued my interest in community music therapy. I kept reading the writings of Dr. Steger and others, and then that led to this research study that Dr. Kruger and Dr. Steger, as well as two of my former students, collaborated on, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So that's kind of how I got to where I am. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Kruger so he can introduce himself.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you for the warm words. And I totally agree. It's a pleasure to work with you and Dr. Steger. My history here is that I was a student back in '97, and Brynjulf Steger was the teacher. I will take you into that a little bit because it matters, I think. At the point, we learned that music therapy was about playing the piano. And there were very few people using other instruments than the piano. But since I was students with other musicians, rock musicians, and people like myself, we managed to kind of put into the study program the bass guitar, the electric guitar, the drum set, and so on. And Brynjulf Steger, he was chairing, and he thought that was a good idea. So all of that has something to do with community music therapy, because the populations that Brynjulf are talking about there, they are adult patients from mental health and prison care and places like that. And they like rock music, and they like to play, and they like to do real music, so to speak. So in Bergen, the music therapists there are using the rock band instruments a lot, and they use the stage. They make festivals and concerts, and that is a very important part of that work. But anyway, Kathy, we don't have much time, and the article here is in focus, so please go ahead.
Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to read the paper. And again, I want to thank everybody who worked with me on it. And we did our introductions. We're going to go over the research study, but then we really want to have a discussion sort of about what we came up with and why this is relevant at this point in time in the United States as our practice for music therapists, in our practice as music therapists. So I want you to think about how you conceptualize community music therapy. When we started this, and you'll see in the next slide, we did ask the people that we interviewed how they define music therapy. But in talking more with Viggo, and as we just heard from Brynjolf, it really doesn't have a definition. It's more a way of conceptualizing our work. So as I'm going through Viggo and I are going through the rest of these slides, I want you to think about this, and then we'll come back, and then I would love to hear sort of your thoughts on how you conceptualize community music therapy. And more importantly, why do we need to be thinking about the PREPARE acronym and those different elements of community music therapy? And even if we don't work in a setting that supports community music therapy, or as Jesse Ash-Ortiz pointed out, our institution is really not engaged in anti-oppressive practices. How can we at least bring them to our music therapy setting? How can we as music therapists sort of think about that acronym and how does it relate to an anti-oppressive, more egalitarian way of working? So this was the purpose of our studies. We wanted to begin a dialogue with music therapists who consider their music therapy practice to fall within the boundaries of community music therapy, and to increase awareness of the ways in which community music therapy principles are being implemented within the United States healthcare and educational systems. And perhaps if we did a survey, we could have got more responses. But as we were talking about the study design, we really thought that it would be more important to interview people to get more rich data, because surveys can give you Likert scaled answers, like, so how many people are practicing, how many people do these different, or are aware of the PREPARE acronym, and how many people, and it didn't make sense to me, because I am a qualitative researcher, not a quantitative researcher. And so we did a thematic analysis of our interviews, and we interviewed 6 music therapists. And again, qualitative research looks for smaller numbers. We didn't have to have 500 participants. And we really wanted to gain an understanding of how community music therapy is conceptualized. What are the relationships between the music therapist and the clients or the participants in music therapy? And what is the relationship between sort of music therapy, the music therapist, and the community, right? And we wanted then to speculate on how their approach to the work could influence health policy and access to services, which, for those of you who are here as an American audience, know that there's a huge disparity in healthcare. And beyond that, there's a huge disparity in who can have access to music therapy, because we are not a universally reimbursed profession in the United States, much like OTPT, counselors. we're kind of like at the bottom of the rung. In my opinion, again, this is just my opinion, we are an oppressed profession, right? Trying to work in a non-oppressive way to bring more people, to have more people have access to music therapy, which I think is one of the benefits of a community music therapy kind of approach. So you can read these definitions in the article, but everybody had their own way of defining music therapy. As you look through all 6 definitions, in the article, you'll see that there are some similarities, there are some vast differences, and that's okay. And I think that, again, speaks to the nature of what Brynjolf was speaking about in his presentation, that there is no one definition, right? It's like not like the AMTA definition, which is the clinical and evidence-based use of music by whatever. I hate that definition. So it doesn't fit that kind of mold. And I think as I think more about this and listening to this presentation, even my perception of community music therapy is changing away from a definition as opposed to a way of being in relationship with the people that I have the opportunity to work with and the communities that they come from.
Yes, although when we read through the data, we found that community music therapy is person-oriented approach, and that is important in terms of human rights perspective, because it starts with the person. You can't do anything as a music therapist without having the person in focus. That doesn't mean that that is the only goal with the therapy. As Brynjolf talked about, there is several levels of meaning here, and the second theme is connected to the relational perspective, pointing a little bit to Bronfenbrenner's meso level, and the third is about social responsibility, and pointing, I would say, to, well, we say in the article, to Bronfenbrenner's levels outside the meso level, the exo and what is the third level again called, Brynjolf? You had the model here.
It's called macro, exo and macro.
Yes. So these are our way of understanding the data. So it's not the theory as such. We discussed the theory later in the discussion, but we realized when we read the data that the informants are actually describing the practices in relation to these 3 themes. So we could pick up on that and discuss Bronfenbrenner in the discussion. So over to you, Kathy.
Okay. So again, I think when we look at the themes, we're not seeing something that we can come up with as a concrete definition, but we're seeing a way of working or a way of being in relationship with the people that we have the opportunity to work with and alongside. So we're going to zip to the discussion. And these 4 questions are sort of meant to make us think, or to and we can talk really about anything, but these were just some ideas that we had, sort of, what stood out to you, what were you surprised by, is any of this relevant to what you're doing now? How do you think these approaches fit within current music therapy practice? But then that first question that we started out with, like, sort of, how do you conceptualize music, community music therapy?
So if you want to, feel free to be brave and hop on the mic and say whatever you'd like, but also, again, drop in the chat, drop in the Q&A. Any reactions, basically? What are people thinking?
Well, so Chris, you made the comment that it's highly relevant in the projects and the community music therapy-based work in your clinic and educational programs. I'm wondering if you can expand on that, and then that might be a jumping off point for some other folks in the group.
I would say when I first read your all study, that's what stood out to me, the relevance, but also the concerns that people were having that your interviewees had and their definitions and how they think about that. It was interesting to think when you're from the idea of translating from this worldwide ecosystem that had different values, as we just talked about context wise, to the kinds of rubs that we are having when we're developing these things. And like you mentioned too, the oppression and belittling of our roles as music therapists, that we have to have a very tough skin in the environments that we work in because if those belittling comments or the fact that funding is like, whoa, it's not volunteer, or oh, we can't fund that anymore out of nowhere, or like you were saying at the beginning when you were talking about like the behavioral models, and it's more about, I think, anything that's like tangible outcome oriented models, because even when we're partnering with organizations, we're still trying to find ways that we can serve both of like, are there outcomes that make sense to see if we can keep an eye on while we simultaneously do this identity-based work, this looking at the person in their context and looking, whether it's individual or, a very traditional, performance group-oriented experience. Either way, it's that shape shifting, I think, is what, I feel a lot. And, we're writing grants and we have to think very clearly about, okay, what does this organization value? And how do we align with those things so that, our partnerships make sense? So,
Can I comment on that, Chris?
100%.
Because you are pointing on something that is very, very relevant there for the practical work of music therapists, but also researchers and activists, and that is the language that the human rights and the sustainability perspectives put in the forefront. When I teach, for example, Elisabeth's students here about the Child Convention and the human rights for children, I say to them, if they start using the language that are inherent in the convention, then they will maybe be taken more seriously, and they may get more funding, because the organization, as you say, the organizations and the funding parties, they understand this language much more than the music therapy language that we have learned in the teaching program. So I'm not saying that we should forget that, but if we incorporate more of this policy language and use it, then we touch upon the Bronfenbrenner's layers that are actually about that, how language and how power and how structures are making possibilities for us, but they are also making problems and hinders for us. And I believe that Brynjulf's example from Bergen, when we have managed to implement music therapy in the hospitals and so on, is very much about the persons. Like the film you saw, people get impressed when they see the movie because they understand that this person has something valuable for him, but it's also about the language that has been used in many documents and applications and letters and emails and so on to people in power. So yeah, so I strongly recommend that we we do that and look at the power language and use it. And there is no more strong language than the rights perspective that has been highlighted here today. But also the UN sustainability goals are also very prominent, and some may think that the sustainability perspective is about a greener world and climate change and cars and stuff like that. But there is a dimension in that way of thinking which has to do with social sustainability. And all of the things that has been said today about mental health, welfare, and persons with disabilities in society is about social sustainability, and it's all there in the 17 goals. And the 17th goal itself says something about collaboration. So I'm about to give a serve to you now, Brynjulf, but the knowledge cluster that is in Bergen is all about collaboration and how parties and sectors and institutions work together to lift music therapy, so to speak, up to a higher level. So you didn't say anything about polyphone, Brynjulf, but yeah, you can, if you want. Here is your serve to that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the United States is the only country that has not adopted the UN Convention for the Best Interests of the Child. So many of us are not familiar with that. And had I not met Brynjulf, I wouldn't even known it existed. And I think the sustainability goals are also really important. Again, I don't know how many American music therapists are familiar with that. I happen to work at an institution that those sustainability goals are supposed to drive everything that we do, and we have sustainability designations on our course syllabi and whatnot. But I think that you bring up a good point. For us in the United States, maybe there are similar ideas or notions coming about that mirror some of that content. I know SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, is starting to change their tune a little bit. And if you go to their website and look at all the free resources that they have, I'll put the link in the chat in a minute, your tax dollars at work for a good purpose. They're really starting to realize or take a look at harm reduction, in terms of mental health and substance use, which never was on their radar. It was always abstinence only. And so I think the tide is ever so slowly, like frozen molasses, changing, but I think we can have a role in that. And if we can look at how our programs can advance some of the issues that we are having. And, so Vigo and I are working on developing a program for an under-resourced school in Newburgh, New York, near where I live. And we have a whole group of faculty from our university who's going to be supporting us in doing that, and getting it started. Now we are going to have to collect some data because we need some grant funding, right? And so we can't just say, oh, wow, this was a great program, right? So we are going to have to collect some of that data kind of stuff. But it'll be more in terms of focus groups, in terms of what are the parents saying, what are the teachers saying, what are the students saying, most importantly, to use that as a way of getting some extra funding so that this program can continue beyond a semester. And then the students in our program are then going to learn how to do this, because they're going to be involved working with the students in the after school program. Our music therapy students are going to be involved helping us help them develop a program so that when they graduate, they can then go out into the world and sort of do the same thing, which is really what it's all about, right? It's about, sharing knowledge, sharing techniques, and all of that. So I'm going to be quiet now because I know somebody had raised their hand and had a question.
Yeah, Peggy, why don't you come on, and if you want to come on the mic and tell us.
Hey, great. Hi, Peggy from Temple University. Um, I've been hearing the words community and ecology and all of that, and being in Philadelphia, right in the middle of the inner city, and also having gotten trained as a nature-informed therapist 2 years ago, just to like refire myself. I'm really excited about, usually in the communities that don't have access to resources such as music therapy and programs, they also don't have access to nature. And so my challenge to myself and to all of us who are interested in community music therapy is, how can we also include the idea of nature as part of the greater community? Because where we work, there's just as there's almost a fear of music making, there's a fear of nature. And we're often needed as bridges to music making, and we're also needed as bridges to reestablishing a healthy relationship with nature. So I just wanted to plant that seed in all of us who think in terms of music therapy about adding that aspect. I'm even thinking of adding that nature as the fourth to Brusha's therapist client music, nature. So I'm loving that. I'm loving the exploration I'm doing with that too. So more, please, from all of you who are researching and practicing.
We got a few other people in the chat if you want to grab onto those. What did Maggie write here? I'm a music therapist at a school for children, not an environment where people even understand what music therapy is, how to access it is limited, and they have to pay out of pocket, so people can't afford it. The culture of the community is predominantly South Asian, and the idea of therapy has negative connotations for some parents, like their kids have a problem. Comment is one way I combat this oppressive environment is reframing it as health and wellness to encourage parents to enroll their children that might benefit.
So that, I just want to comment, that's really awesome, right? I think when we go to school, we get so caught up in, oh, I'm a music therapist and this is what music therapy is, and this is what we have to do. Okay, and I'm going to say when I was a young music therapist, I did that. I'm old now, so I don't. But I think being able to reframe what we do in a way that makes sense to the people that we're working with is really more important. And I remember Dr. Brusha, I mean, he has this elaborate definition, and he would just say, but this is just for music therapists. This is just for you to think about what you're doing. This is not your definition for the general public, because it's too long, it's too complicated. But to say, I want to provide this program for your child because it's going to benefit their health. It's going to help them to feel better. It's going to help them to make friends, right? Peer support is one of the trauma-informed principles. Like, how do we do trauma-informed music therapy? We provide opportunities for people to develop peer relationships. What better way than in group music therapy? Okay, I'm going to get off my high horse now because somebody else might have something to say about that. But I really appreciate the way, Maggie, that you reframe that in terms of health and wellness. And I think we can all learn something from that. I don't know, Vigo, Chris, Brynjolf.
I just want to put in there, Kathy, because you said that the US has not put in the UN Child Convention into national laws, and that is true. Actually, it's the only country in the world who has not done that, and it was signed by Clinton once, but it has not been taken into the laws by none of the presidents after that. But however, the concept, the best interest of the child, which is the Article 3 in the convention, is in use in the US. And I put in a link here to to childwelfare.gov, which is a national level, I believe, in the US, and they are talking about the best interest of the child. And if you want to use that concept or another concept, a concept like trauma-informed care, I think it's a good thing to use a language that people understand and that people in schools and child protection services and hospitals can relate to, so that we are not being treated as exotic plants that needs to have special attention all the time. So yeah, it's about language use, I think, and about incorporating a language that is valid in in the interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary context that we are part of. We talk a lot about this with our students, and they struggle with this in the beginning, and gradually they understand that they have to learn music therapy per se, but they also have to learn all of the other professions, languages and way to think, and those of them who understand this the best, they will the easiest get the best jobs. That is my thinking around that.
So, Kathy, did you just see that Gabby's big comment? Those are a bunch of good. I feel like we're probably going to spend the rest of the hour.
Right. I don't. It's really a very important point, right? And I think in music therapy, again, I went to school in the 1970s when ethics was barely talked about. And so watching how ethics have changed in music therapy practice over the last 40 some years has been interesting. Not my particular area of research, but of interest. And something I've been thinking about more and more when we think about who's in and who's out. Right? And how much control do I have as a music therapist to decide who's in and who's out? Now, in my private practice, I can decide who's in and who's out. I can decide who I want to work with and who I don't want to work with, and how much am I going to charge? Am I going to charge everybody the same? Am I going to... And Gabby, Gabrielle, I'm not sure if this is getting to the heart of your question, but I think the ethics around who gets access and who doesn't get access is a huge problem in the United States, not just for music therapy, but for healthcare in general. And so in my ethical considerations are, in my work, am I meeting the needs of the clients that they have identified to me as important? Am I able to accept a person and who they are and what they believe in a way that is not oppressive? So am I able to not be the expert, but to be somebody who's witnessing somebody's journey and can provide opportunities for individuals to learn more about who they are, how who they are is manifesting in the music. So I always bring it back to the music and what happens in the music, because I'm a music therapist. I'm not a talk therapist. I'm not a counselor. I'm not an occupational therapist. I'm not a physical therapist. I'm a music therapist. And so how can I provide music opportunities that respect and value each person from where they come from? And how can that engagement in music help people to learn more about themselves based on what they believe, rather than imposing an external framework? And so, Gabrielle, if you want to unmute yourself and let me know if I answered that, or if there's something else that you were thinking about, because it's a really important question.
Yeah, no, what I was mostly thinking about was the notion about the multiple roles that we as therapists
Oh,
take on within community music therapy.
right.
And for me, that brushes up against a complex dynamic of like borders and boundaries and liminality, and sort of that nuanced exploration is what I'm curious about. I asked so much there, and that I realized I threw a lot there.
Yeah.
But how do we conceptualize that? Because in the work that I do within the context of a hospital, a lot of my work is around like socio-political stuff with individuals of historically marginalized communities that are undocumented here, that are, in a system, kind of caught in systems that are quite oppressive to them. And so in that pursuit, some of the work that I do sort of challenges the work that I do as a music therapist, where I'm sort of bordering sometimes into social work, and there's boundaries that are also being confined here in the hospital that's saying, this is your role. And so for me, I'm just sort of in this place of, let's say, liminality, exploring that. And when I see in the article that it says there's this notion of openness and willingness to embrace multiple roles, I'm curious as to where are the limits, and
Okay.
that's sort of where I'm sitting, and yeah, that's all I'll say.
Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying, because I totally misunderstood.
Kathy, can I try to
Yeah,
answer?
yeah,
Mika
yeah,
here,
definitely.
we're wondering about when to call it therapy and not, and I think that is a really very relevant question, because when we teach students in Bergen about community music therapy, we say to them that even though you are educated a music therapist, that doesn't mean that everything you do in the community is therapy. And we try to make this division between the profession that I have and the practice that they are doing, and that could be a way to avoid this slightly stigmatizing word therapy. And it's an ethical question, because is it wrong to hide your identity as a music therapy, and when should you kind of reveal your identity as a music therapist? And there is no clear-cut answer to it, but I think it's fair to say that you don't always have to go out in the world and say that what you do are music therapy, because then you might scare a lot of people away because they don't like therapy. They don't want to have anything about it, and it's stigmatizing and marginalizing you as a person if you are receiving therapy. So yeah, that was just a response to Mika here, and I like that question. And we discussed that a lot in Bergen as well.
Yeah. And I think, Gabby, some of the roles that we were talking about in the article were like sometimes the interviewees were in the role of traditional music therapists. Sometimes they were in the role of stage manager. Sometimes they were in the role of participant, and somebody in a member of the group would take over as the leader. So I think the roles were sort of what were the roles within the confines of what was happening in the group, as opposed to stepping into another discipline's role, if that makes sense.
I also, what you all were thinking too, and saying just then reminded me. So like, not only do you, like Vigo, you mentioned not scaring people off per se, like from an outside kind of perspective, but I also think like, we've been doing music therapy, community music therapy groups with our students and us together at a local foster care group facility, right? And the culminating performance aspect is the teenagers that live in this group home have come and performed on campus. And but even that, it's like they get therapy, they get clinical, psychiatric assistance. They're in, therapy groups all day long. And though I am a music therapist, I'm hesitant to call that time like therapy time, because it's like you all have therapy all day long. My goal is to let you be a teenager for an hour. Like, because if you were a teenager and wanted to make music, you probably could if you weren't in this institution. Like you could figure out a way to do that. So, and also when they come and they perform, it's not their music therapy performance. It's like, no, they're performing, they're entertaining you. They're not a foster kid for 10 minutes.
And your point, Chris, are again pointing towards language and language use. I think also working with community music therapy is about that, really, to be conscious about which words you use and how you engage in different discourses. And myself, I have background working with young people, and for some, therapy will scare them away, but for others, therapy is a resource that they gain that they can't get anywhere else. So you have to know the person that you are working with. So again, back to the person-oriented approach, you cannot escape that. You have to start with the person-oriented approach, knowing who you are working with. Depending on that, you can decide what kind of approach you wanna have for your practice. And but to treating everyone one size for all is, we know that is wrong, at least. So the community music therapy approach is helping us working in a flexible way. We can have multiple roles. We can engage with different discourses. And personally, I believe very strongly, as I said, in this role as the music therapist being the advocate for the rights of the people that we are working with. Because if we are able to fund projects, write up applications, engage in the human rights discourse, use the sustainability goals, then we are in a better position than if we don't do it. So again, these things are connected to each other, and there is not one size fits all, I believe. And the article that we have written, Kathy, shows very clearly that.
Yeah. Right. And I think that's really important. And I actually also think no matter what your theoretical orientation is, one size does not fit all. Right. And it really is based on what a person needs. So as an example, I might be working in substance use treatment. That's where my clinical interests lie in what I'm doing right now. And I'm very much a person-centered type of therapist and do a lot of, I don't direct the group. I don't walk in with a session plan. The clients that I work with direct the group, what we're going to do based on, kind of how they check in or whatnot. But there are times when I'm going to say, you know what? I think what we need to do is we need to learn how to use music to help with breathing. And so now I'm going to bring in some techniques or some methods. And so I might become more directive because it seems like that's in service of what the participants are needing, right? And so I couldn't do this when I walked out of school in 1981, right? I mean, I had session plans back then, but 40 years later, I don't use session plans, right? I kind of walk in and work with the people who are in front of me, saying that, you know more about you than I do. You're the experts on you. I know probably a little bit more about how music might be helpful, but maybe I don't. And I'm okay with that because people have their own relationships with music and how they use it. So I don't think that we ever should be a one size fits all. I don't, and I know there are people in the United States who would vehemently, and in Canada, vehemently disagree with me. And that's okay. It's America, it's a free country. But I think for me, community music therapy and sort of that acronym really applies to most of my clinical work. And I didn't really realize it until I had gotten involved in this community music therapy project and really read all of the readings more from a scholarly perspective than a student perspective. So I think that's really a good point. So, yeah. think there's some more conversation. There's a follow-up question from Kayla. Do you believe that even if one tries to meet a client where they are, they may not be perceived openly due to the unconscious or conscious biases?
That was based off of Chris's comment saying, as a white male in Kentucky, I may access privilege to assume a role in a blasé way when others may not be taken serious based on different intersectionalities. So this is me coming in as a queer Black woman in Maryland, wanting to, you know, have these conversations with my clients, coming at them like I am, you know, wanting to sit and listen and hold space. But some people may just not want to hold space with me. And it's like, I very much value people, but also understand that people just may not value me back.
Mm-hmm.
How do I hold space? How do I do that as a woman of color? Does that question make sense at all?
Yes. And there's a master's thesis coming out in just a very few weeks that will have a much better answer than I will.
I'm very excited.
Yeah. Yeah. If you send me your email address, I will invite you to
Absolutely. Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah.
Can I try to answer, because
You can.
I reflections, and I think that also being therapist in the meeting with people, it's a totally open endeavor. Also, everything can happen. You don't have control over everything, or anything. So if you try to control or define or understand or get into the head of the other person, then you're doomed to fail, because it will not be a success. So I don't know if this is a good answer, but what I would try to do is to try to be open, listening, and see what happens in the relations, because it's in the relations and in the activities and in the practice that you can actually say something about that. You can try to think and analyze and be psychoanalytical, but in the end, what do you gain from that? Really nothing. And especially with children, it's very, very difficult to try to analyze the dreams and the lyrics of children. It's a mess. So yeah, I don't know if that was a good question, but
but I think you
answer. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. It's just about, it's respecting what people want to share with us and what they're comfortable with. Not everybody is comfortable. The people that I've worked with, you know, were comfortable having me as their therapist. They've asked to go to another group, and I'm like, okay, you need to find what works for you. But again, I think it's really important to realize that both Vigo and I have been working for longer than 5 minutes. And so what I'm saying now and what I'm able to do now is coming after 40 years of experience. As a new music therapist, I probably would have been devastated if somebody, you know, didn't want to work with me as a therapist. And I'm probably glad that I worked with nonverbal people and couldn't figure that out. So I think some of these, and in being able to incorporate some of these principles into our work, comes with maturity in the field and not leaving. And I think one of the problems that we have in American music therapy is the average lifespan of a music therapist in the United States is 5 to 7 years. That's not enough time to consider and to think about and to really develop who you are as a therapist. You know, in 5 to 7 years, you're just trying to figure out, okay, should I do something recreative or is improvisation? And how do I order instruments? And how do I, you know, collect data that's me? I mean, you don't have time to really think about all of these concepts deeply. And then, and I don't mean any offense by this, but, and this is my opinion, the fact that we're a bachelor's level entry profession, you can only learn so much in 4 years, right? And then you're going out and you're in the world working with all of these different kind of people who you may or may not be prepared to work with. And then you become, maybe you become overwhelmed, or maybe you say, oh, I'm just going to go be a counselor and learn how to talk to people, because you haven't really learned how to work in a deeper way within the music, and how to meet people where they are in the music, and how to think about that prepare acumen, and what does that mean musically. And so I think there are all of these problems that, you know, sort of get in our way or prevent us as a profession from really moving forward. And again, I will step off my soapbox right now and let somebody else.
Yeah, as we kind of right now have hit 12, I'm wondering if Vigo and you, Kathy, both have any kind of like last thoughts or big takeaways from what everybody's been asking, or like a challenge, any questions or things we should carry over to the next hour. We're about to get everybody, the gang, all here in just a second. So what are your all's kind of last thoughts and takeaways for yourself?
Go ahead, Vigo.
Based on what Kathy just said, I was lingering with one comment here, and it's similar to what we constantly teach the students in Bergen, and that is this. In the end, you have to find your own personal style, your own creative way of being a music therapist. When you're out there in the field, tools like Prepare and books Brucia has edited and so on are tools that we can use. But when it comes to meeting real persons in real life, it's your style and your personal identity as a music therapist that counts. And that is something you partly find during an education program, and you develop it gradually throughout your whole professional life. So it's a big journey, actually. And I feel sad to hear that it lasts so short in the US. I think you should do something with that so that people continue longer in their work, because it takes a lot of time to be a good therapist.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. Like when I look at what I did back in the 1980s to where I am now, it's like night and day. But I think here's my closing comment. Be authentic. Be true to who you are as a person. What are your values? What's important to you? And how does that align with how you work as a music therapist? Because if you are an externally motivated person, and if you need a lot of external rewards, that might make you more aligned to a way of working where there are more external rewards, because that's who you are. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you're more internally motivated, then you might value a way of working where you want participants to engage in music that's going to motivate them to be there, and that being in the group in and of itself is what is sort of motivating, or how you approach therapy. So you have to be who you are. You can't hide who you are, because then when you are inauthentic as a person, you're inauthentic as a therapist, and then your clients are going to figure that out, and it's not going to, in my opinion, again, on my soapbox, sorry. In my opinion, again, it's not going to work. So you really need to be authentic. And for me, that Prepare acronym and thinking about community music therapy is very authentic to who I am, because I believe so much in the importance of music and how music can be healing and help people to feel whole. And so that is why all of this aligns with me. And that's how my practice has evolved over the past 40 years. And even how I teach is the same way. It's the same way. So thank you, everybody, for listening and for your comments. I'll pop my email in the chat in case you have, any other comments or questions. And, it's really okay if you disagree with me. I'm fine with all of that. And because I don't have all the answers and I'm still learning, and I will continue to learn until the day I die. So thank you to Vigo and to Brynjo for being co-authors on this study and helping me to learn more. And thank you to all of you for being here.
And thank you very much.